What can be said about George Orwell? Well, he was quite aware that once a socialist got into a higher position, he will inevitably become less of a socialist. He was also aware that whenever socialists come together, a bunch of bad people come together. Not all of them, though. He had a bit of a belief that inside every fat man, there indeed was a thin man. Something that sounds like a Christian belief. He also believed that left-wingers were playing with fire without knowing what fire is. Furthermore, there was an understanding that Hitler, who was alive at the time, understood better than progressives that humans desire conflict, that hedonism was not enough for a man, and that Hitler understood quite well that people desired suffering. Surprisingly, or perhaps not surprisingly, he considered private firearm ownership as the symbol of democracy and something to be defended. At the same time, despite being a pacifist, understood that pacifism has more freedom in democracies and therefore could work against democracies. In addition, he saw life as a choice between two evils, a lesser and a greater evil. Some may argue that this is like the flesh and Satan. In regards to the temporality of desires, he says, "Nearly all creators of utopia have resembled the man who has toothache, and therefore thinks happiness consists in not having toothache. They want to produce a perfect society by an endless continuation of something that had only been valuable because it was temporary. The wider course would be to say that there are certain lines along which humanity must move. The grand strategy is mapped out, but detailed prophecy is not our business." In addition, he believed that left-wing political thought to be much like a masturbation fantasy where facts don't really matter. Speaking of facts, he worried that focusing on science over literature and history would hurt mass education, producing a bitter effect towards knowledge. In regards to freedom, Orwell believed that public opinion was what it allowed it. Governments may make laws, but in the end, they will be enforced if the public demands it. One can imagine the Egyptians who died under Pharaoh's reign. Of course, on the topic of groups of people, there was discussion of how each generation views itself smarter than the last, and furthermore wiser than the one after it. Remain as you are, was his belief, however, as he saw that your identity sprang from your experiences that others have not had. But again, back to public opinion. This, he believed, was what kept books from being published, and not government prosecution, or the fear of it. And back to utopia, he decried the unwillingness of those in the West to acknowledge the Soviet Union as barbaric. And of course, he believed that liberty was about telling people what they don't want to hear. However, one can deny what is true up until they bump into a gun on the battlefield. Finally, he discussed that a utopia that does not cause one to enjoy anything is not worth anything. And part of the desire to see utopia, this is why they defend the Soviet Union, is so that they can have their hands on the whip, the intelligentsia, that is. Yet he points out that in the end, it is just public opinion that seems to be the strongest master. A man will act somewhat freely under any law, but under the desire to conform, he has no freedom. One, of course, can see this acted out in how strong Christianity is in countries where there is brutal repression, yet it is but dead in free countries where Christianity is looked down upon as a filthy philosophy. Lastly, on false humility, he has this to say: he who believes he believes what he believes simply because he has chosen the more altruistic path often feels that in his kindness and his gentle superiority he must lead the masses, and if they are to disagree, then he must use whatever force, for, after all, it is for their good he is forcing them. One can think of many philosophies today which are for a supposed noble cause that, in enacting the method to that cause, push for the opposite.